What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Assemble Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Jones. Whether I'm hitting the trails, training for an ultramarathon, or pushing my limits in the gym strength training, I've always been fascinated by what drives us to perform at our best. This podcast is for everyone, from the serious endurance, strength, or hybrid athlete to the outdoor enthusiast who wants to live life to the fullest. I believe that peak performance is an assembly of physical training, mental fortitude, emotional health, and social support. Whether you're training for a sport or viewing life itself as the ultimate athletic event, join me in redefining limits and living a life full of challenges and adventure. Let's get into today's podcast. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. We've got Chris and Joe back on the podcast. We've had them on previously. Chris has been on a few times, so I'm not going to give them a super big introduction. If you haven't listened to those, Chris and Joe, would you mind giving just like a quick introduction to what you're doing right now? Chris, you want to start?
I'm a CSCS and TSAC-F. I help at my my neighborhood gym mostly with their firefighter prep program. And I also coach gym pop and distance runner.
And I have the same certifications as Chris. I got a master's in ex-phys. Currently in the Army right now, going through their master's program in nutrition. Going to be a human performance specialist for the Army afterwards, working with hopefully special operations.
So the last time we talked a lot about endurance training. So we thought we'd talk about strength training in this one and kind of start the same way we did with endurance. So go over some gen pop stuff and then into some performance athletes and then tactical. Last time we talked, we had a lot of tactical guys listen. I had some people reach out to me, and obviously some people in the Discord for the group training found it interesting. So that's definitely probably where we'll spend most of our time, but I definitely wanted to give a little bit of a ramp up, just like we did with our, endurance discussion. Does that sound good to you guys?
Sure
That sounds
does.
Good deal. So first off, you've got kind of the gen pop person who's not really sure about strength training. Maybe, Chris, especially in the gym that you work in, people might come in for the first time, think I just need to get like in shape, be a little bit more fit, but I don't really know what that looks like. We covered when we talked last time a little bit about how endurance and cardiovascular training fits into that. But when somebody comes in and they want to get healthier, they might think, I want to lift. I don't want to be too bulky, not really sure how that looks. So maybe starting with Chris, like if somebody comes in and asks those questions, how do you kind of ramp them up? What education do you provide them? And what do you tell them when they're kind of just interested, not really ready yet to start a strength training program, just interested in what it's going to look like?
I like to ask what kind of strength they have in mind. I think if you're not, I think most people think of strength as like kind of the 1RM sort of, very grindy sorts of training that you see a lot of powerlifters do. Gen pop doesn't necessarily want to compete. So I kind of explain that there's different types of resistance training and you can kind of branch out into different qualities like from there. Slow speed strength, however, in a hypertrophy sense seems to fit the bill with a lot of those people. That's kind of like what they're looking for. They usually want to be healthy and look better naked. So it's just this hypertrophy range type of training that I would kind of explain to them. This is what it looks like. It's never going to be super, super heavy. Just a typical session would just be in the 8 to 12 range where the last few reps are pretty difficult. And I kind of show them what that might look like from like a exercise selection perspective.
Joe, I know you used to work with more gen pop. I don't know how many you have now, if you have any that you work with now, but do you have any thoughts?
Previously, that's kind of the way I would do it too. Also kind of start them slow, ramp them up, because the last thing you want to do as like a trainer coach is take someone who's new to the gym and give them a bad experience by training too hard and have them be ungodly sore for the next week or so afterwards. And some people may like that. A lot of people don't. So it's just making sure that they get the baby steps into it and then kind of start adding in more of those special exercises like a couple months down the road and stuff. So really it's just starting with the basics, starting to get them to feel the movements, understand their own body, how it works, how their recovery is and things of that nature. Because a lot of people don't take that into account, especially if they're working, their 8-hour job, then they got the family stuff afterwards. They're not getting sleep. Their nutrition isn't on point. So it's just like kind of trying to get them all to that more generally healthy lifestyle.
Wait,
Yeah,
Joe,
I've
so
got people.
you don't start people with 6 sets per movement on day one?
No, I don't. I've seen it happen before, and those people don't come back.
Yeah, I've got a lot of people personally that come and want to do more a lot of the time. So especially at first, because maybe they've done a boot camp or a challenge where it was really hard for a few weeks and they fell off. So I also try to explain to people like this is going to ramp up. It might feel too easy to you because you're used to kind of going all out for 2 weeks and then not going back. So kind of explain that we're going to build that consistency and ramp them up. If they feel like it's too easy, to let me know because
Mhm.
it is supposed to be somewhat difficult. But again, not going to start somebody off with like 100, of X movement or all this
Right.
crazy stuff like they might be used to seeing in some, challenges, boot camps or whatever. And then I do have people come in, I kind of mentioned it and ask about, I want to get toned. I don't want to look too big. And obviously there's some, you don't want to come out and say, oh, you're wrong. You want to gauge, are they open to new
Yeah.
information or are we just going to run with what they're saying? Because we know what they're talking about, even though it's not scientific.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so I kind of just try to talk to those people. If somebody's interested, I'll kind of maybe explain to them like, yeah, so like it takes years of effort to get big, you're
Mhm.
not going to accidentally get big. The tone of discussion I don't normally have because I find most people aren't interested in, toned isn't technically a thing and this is what it is. Um,
I see that a lot with a lot of females saying that they wanna get toned and stuff, and it's just more of a, "Yeah, you go into the gym and do stuff, but what are you doing on the outside? What does your nutrition look like?" Now, me being more in the nutrition realm, it's just, okay, so you gotta, maybe not eat the 3 Big Macs per week and stuff like that, bring it down to 2, really dial in what you're doing and actually understand what you're eating. I know a lot of people don't like tracking, so not trying to bring it to nutrition talk, but just doing maybe 2 weeks of understanding what you're eating and doing a food diary of some sort just to understand that like you are eating, I don't know, candy bars at this time of day. Why is that? And kind of go from there. And then they will get toned, by that, taking themselves into account and figuring things out that way.
yeah. And from a nutrition perspective, sometimes more of a fat loss and more of a hypertrophy program can look fairly similar, especially to somebody who doesn't really know the intricacies of things. And the difference is really just, are you in a surplus or a deficit at that point? Because when you're in a deficit, you're trying to keep as much lean muscle mass as possible. So the training a lot of the times isn't super different. Obviously there's minutia like here and there, but so,
And
uh,
the caveat there though is right. Any untrained beginner will reap the benefits of both, right? If you're super new to resistance training of any kind, you're going to make some gains no matter
Right.
what in the first few months and lose some weight probably.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Especially the less trained you are, you can put muscle on and lose body fat a little bit easier than somebody who's been training for, a decade. But when it comes to a Gen Pop, like the only other big point I had was like a lot of people, look at programs and they don't know, maybe they're trying to buy a plan online. They don't know what to look for. And really they're trying to look for the most optimized thing when like you said, like somebody who doesn't have a ton of training is going to benefit regardless. And so the thing I try to point people to is just, does this fit with your schedule? Is it something that you're going to enjoy? Because that's going to be like
Mhm.
something you stick to long term. And then once you've consistently done it for a certain period of time and you're comfortable and you want more, then we can talk about, okay, like we could move this around. This could be, shuffled this way and maybe optimize a little more. But first, like a lot of people want to focus on up here when really it's just, can I get in consistently 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week?
And when people are looking to buy programs, is not picking the most influential person out there, especially if they don't have any education in it and their certifications. I know it's not the end all be all, but at least having something is better than just being like, oh, I've been in training for 10 years and I kind of know what I'm talking about. Kind of looking at Bare Performance Nutrition, don't want to throw them under the bus, but their exercise selection and training plans are not for most people.
Yeah, I've had some consult calls with people, not naming anybody in particular, but a few different plans they've tried to buy online and stuff. And they were like, I couldn't do it. It wanted me to train 3 times a day. And I had, I haven't even been training that long, let alone I have a family and a job. And yeah, I mean, I have that discussion a lot. So it definitely comes up. When it comes to Chris, I know you said you're working with the fire prep. Do you work with a good amount of Gen Pop 101 that come in? I know you've been talking about doing like a conditioning class too that I've seen online. So could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my gym just started a conditioning class. It's just energy systems development and mostly kind of uh, rowing and biking. I think running tends to be a really cool option for most people. Like if they have no, especially if they have no experience, right? maybe in your mind's eye, you think that you're really, really athletic, like me. But I think that I can do all this, cool agility stuff, but that's just not the case with most people. So the layout of that class is I have them start with running drills as kind of our dynamic warm up. And then we go into, depending on what day it is, we'll do some sort of interval work, 15 seconds of work with 45 seconds rest. We'll do a few rounds of that and then a longer component at the end. So it's just kind of like, hey, we'll work a little bit of, elactic power intervals and then just kind of a longer 20 to 30-minute row or something at a conversational pace. That's the biggest pushback that I've gotten so far, is that people don't really know what that feels like, or they're like, hey, am I actually benefiting from this? I hardly feel anything. I can talk. I feel like I can talk to you all day kind of at this pace. And I'm like, that's kind of the idea. And then at the end of each class, the way I have it structured is at the end, we do some sort of lower leg development. So I just went through David Gray's lower body basics course, like the module that he has like on his website. Those are money, man. I don't know that I've ever cramped so hard in my hamstrings and one of my calves doing some of those drills. They're really weird. I've never seen them before. It's nothing I did in college, but I think the benefit there is just understanding how the calf and the hamstring and the foot kind of produce tension together or create tension to produce force, like when you're running. And people kind of get the idea a little bit when I show them, like, hey, like when you're in stance phase and you're starting to go into your toe off, this is what the hamstring and the calf and the foot are doing together. So there's a little bit of that at the end of each class. And that's going okay. People are buying into that a little bit. And I do have a little asterisk, in every, or disclaimer in every session. Hey, eventually we will be running and you should kind of keep that in mind. But for now, it's a lot of rowing and biking.
Is that a one-time thing, or can people join like in the middle of a block?
They can join the middle of the block because I'm repeating the sessions for 4 weeks at a time before they progress. But obviously, if somebody comes in and they need something modified, I can do that. The class is actually right after our like academy prep class, so that those are all cadets who are already accepted into the fire academy. So if they wanted to join that class right after they did their session, which is more CrossFit based, very, very intense type of session, I just modify for them and just make it slow, easy, long intervals, sub max. They wouldn't really benefit from a lot of hard interval work right after they did something hard.
Yeah, good deal. That sounds fun. Teaching a group class in person sounds like a good time. So
Uh,
back up a little bit for Gen Pop. If somebody is evaluating a program or one-on-one or
mhm.
something, I have a question, but first I wanted to mention, we mentioned certifications. I think Joe mentioned certifications. As we all know, like a certification doesn't make a good coach, but a certification kind of is a baseline knowledge. So that is one thing you can look for when you're looking at a program or a coach is, it's, again, there are good coaches without certifications, but it's an easy way for somebody that doesn't know what they're looking for to say, hey, this person at least knows a baseline knowledge. But then when somebody's evaluating a program, people might be on the fence. Do I need to go in and get a personal trainer? Do I need like an online coach? Do I just need to buy a plan? And they might look at a strength program or a mixed strength and endurance like health program and not really know what they're looking at. So we've discussed endurance before, so people can check that out and see like what to look for from an endurance or aerobic perspective as far as health goes. But when it comes to strength training, like what would somebody be looking for as far as to evaluate? Is this going to get me to like the goals that I want to get to, or is it just going to be, kind of a waste of my, not, I don't want to say waste because it's never a waste, but is this going to be the best thing for me? He kind of flagged my opinion, which is it should fit with your schedule and be something you enjoy. Yeah, I'm assuming you guys probably agree. If you don't, I'd love to talk about it. But if you do, maybe what's the next thing that somebody should be looking for?
I would say like the next thing someone should be looking for, if they're a complete novice and never have stepped foot in the gym and they are looking for more of that curated one-on-one experience, is to go to a more reputable gym, maybe not necessarily like a Lifetime or like one of those big global gyms, just because those trainers may or may not be the best. I mean, you're gonna have to feel it out as a person, like maybe get some free sessions, see if you like the coach or not. But maybe going to one of those more smaller gyms and seeing more of some of those more niche coaches, because they have been putting in a lot more time and more than likely understand people better than some of those bigger global gyms where they just get like an ISSA certification or something like that. And then the next thing is making sure the coach is demonstrating each of the exercises and giving performance critiques to you as well, especially if you're a complete novice and you have no idea what you're doing. You need to understand how your body should be moving and not being like, oh, this kind of hurts. And the coach says, oh, no, it's fine. Because now if it's hurting, there's a reason it's hurting. There's something wrong going on. So that coach should have that coach's eye to be able to go back and correct and kind of like understand and come up with a solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
In addition to, or sorry.
I was just going to say, I think it was Compound Performance that made a post on this, but I think it's the coach should definitely be providing feedback, but also there's a point with which you should also just kind of modify. Like, for instance, if somebody is unable to do a proper back squat, you can give them cues, but it might be better, especially for a novice, to maybe do a goblet squat for a while and work them up to kind of a combination of not just telling them, I know you didn't mean this, but just for clarity, not just telling them you're doing this wrong, do it better, but also modifying to help them learn to do it better. Because it is a learned like skill.
Regressions and progressions that's like the coach's bread and butter. If they know how to do that correctly, then that's a good identifier of a quality coach.
Right. Yeah. So
Chris, yeah.
modifications. I guess um, I almost don't use the words progressions and regressions anymore, or those words anymore, because of Kyle Dobbs and compound performance. It's just finding a variation that works.
Mhm.
I don't know that I would. I know, like, among coaches, it's okay. We know how to progress movements, but I think that language tends to be a little bit tricky with Gen Pop because they might make somebody feel bad. Oh, we got to regress this to,
Right. Yeah.
anterior reach box squat as one of the most basic squats that you could do, right? But yeah, just finding the variation that works, that still kind of gives the same stimulus, that's targeting the same tissues, I think is really important, like Joe was saying. So being able to give guidance and feedback that way, and then just in what you said at the beginning of, it has to fit this person's lifestyle and their schedule and kind of accommodate their recovery resources. And then I would just add that you find a coach that you really, really vibe with, that you feel is like empathetic to like what your goals are, that they're understanding of your time and your abilities, and is able to kind of adjust a little bit based on what your personality is. You might have someone who's really shy and naive to the gym, and they're going to need a little bit more hand holding than somebody who's maybe like a former power sport athlete who's just like already very motivated, and they just need a little bit of feedback this way or that way. Empathy, I think, is super huge in Gym Pop.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of coaches, I mean, we all probably know, like when you start coaching, at first you say, I have all these other coaches. You can feel kind of like that imposter syndrome. And it takes a little bit to understand that, say X person comes to me, maybe they've heard the same thing I said 10 times from other people, but it didn't resonate. And you highlighted kind of the people, the soft skills portion of coaching, that you have to connect with somebody. So clearly the three of us agree on a lot of things, but you might say something differently than I would that resonates with somebody. And the science and the coaching science part is the same, but the communication style is different. Even if you worded it the same, maybe your body language or your tone of voice, or just they have a better relationship with you and they would actually get value from that information. Whereas if I said it or somebody else said it, they may not. So I think that's super valuable of having you guys on here, and, just a rising tide raises all ships, right? Like just everybody, it's not me versus you versus all these other coaches. We're all just helping as many people as we can in our own areas of expertise. And then going back to what you said about Gen Pop, if you say regression, progression, they might take it to mean something differently. And I find that that's even true though with performance athletes. It's just a little bit different, right? It might not be regression and progression. They might get that, but everybody has there's facts, and then there's what we make those facts mean. So everybody has their own version of that. And so it's not like, oh, Gen Pop person, they might hear them and be like, oh, I'm so stupid for taking it that way. But everybody does it in their own capacity. An endurance athlete might, it might be a different example, but same thing. There's facts, and we make those facts mean something. And that's something that I have a lot of conversations with the people I work with about, because a lot of really high performers tend to beat themselves up a lot for things. I post about that a lot, but I just wanted to highlight those two things because I thought those are important. I was thinking we'd move kind of into performance athletes now, unless you guys have anything else to say before we move on to that.
No.
Nope. Before we go into performance athletes, I find a really interesting portion of, I have some athletes that are like this, would kind of, I guess, fall between. They're more like Gen Pop, but they want to say do their first like triathlon or something. I find that's a super interesting population to work with because a lot of them do have excess body weight they need to lose. Maybe they haven't trained since college or high school 4, 5, 6 years ago, but they definitely mentally identify more with this performance athlete, and that's where you want to get them to. And I would say just personally, I really love like bringing somebody through that, process because, they kind of started that more Gen Pop. Okay, we're going to drop some body fat. We're going to get you aerobically healthy. And then they kind of graduate almost, not really, because it's not like a hard change. It's just a slow progression into more of that performance based athlete. I don't know if you guys have had people like that. I'm sure you have, especially with the military.
I mean, I would say from a lot of the things I've been doing currently, the population is Gen Pop more so than hardcore athletes. I mean, you'll get a dime a dozen on that, like guy who wants to, run marathons, do triathlons, lift as much as he can or she can, and so on and so forth. But a lot of it is it's the military's representation of the general civilian public. So you're gathering those individuals, and a lot of these people don't like to train. So a lot of it is getting people to lose body fat to meet height and weight standards, and it's getting those individuals to want to see further than beyond just like passing PT tests and being within the like army body composition standards. So it's getting them to want to exercise, want to change their lifestyle, want to be healthy. And then sometimes you will see those people want to take that extra step forward and go into more um, advanced type of training, if you will.
Yeah, I'm sure you mentioned working with like special operations, and I'm sure you still have, even like in the infantry, right? You have people that are training to go to a ranger school or SFAS or something. But I'm sure it's probably not a huge a huge portion of the population. Everybody, most of that in day to day life, most people don't want to do that. So, like you said, it's representative of the greater population, which is interesting because when I think of what you do, I'm like, oh, these people are all training for some
Right.
sort of selection because that's, the world that I was in. Chris, you said you work with fire. You guys have that fire academy prep course. Do you find that those people are pretty self motivated, or do you find that they're kind of like, I want to go to the fire academy, but I'm not super motivated to exercise?
It's no. So there's two components to the prep program here, right? There's like a fire. So people, the first group is fire prep. So those are people getting ready to apply to the academy, and there's people that are already in that kind of do this 8 to 12 week thing before they actually start the academy. So in the first group, yes, definitely, there's some people who are going to need a lot more work for a really long time before they can even consider applying, just from a fitness perspective, right? The people that are already accepted tend to, I think we have 15 or 16 people in that class that meets twice a week. Again, it's like CrossFit based because that's what the academy here in Albuquerque kind of uses as their training model. Those people are very, very motivated, and kind of like, if you don't, yeah, I find myself pulling the reins a lot in that class. Just, hey, you need to slow down and do this right, and not just kind of very awkwardly get these reps out or whatever. Or they're trying, their form on the rower is a little bit weird or whatever, something like that. The That's just like I guess the missing pieces for a lot of those people is just, there are a few people in that class that don't, like, can't squat very well, or can't squat the depth very well or whatever. So it's more just form stuff. Um, uh, and not so much the motivation part, right? I think everybody who joins those classes or that program here at my gym are already very motivated. It's just a question of competency with movements and kind of just general fitness improvement. Kind of like Joe said, right? Like it's more Gen Pop. Um, uh, the further you get to the beginning of somebody's tactical athlete journey.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll get to kind of the more tactical athlete perspective because clearly that's what we'll probably spend more time on. But from a performance perspective, clearly if somebody's training for a powerlifting meet or something, they understand strength training is important because it's my whole sport. That's what I'm doing, some powerlifting stuff. So that's really what I do in the gym mainly. But when it comes to somebody who's only, say, a non-strength athlete specifically, so like an endurance athlete or maybe a field sport athlete or insert other sport that's not directly strength training, some of them, especially endurance athletes, might not see the benefit of strength training. They might say, I'm going to just run all the time and then run a marathon or, cycle all the time or, insert endurance activity. So obviously, Chris, you've got a collegiate endurance background, and Joe, obviously, military is also a lot of endurance. So what would you say to that person who's not really sure why they should be strength training? What are the benefits of strength training for non-strength athletes? And then what would that kind of look like in a program at a high level overview? Obviously, we could spend forever in the weeds, but kind of higher level overview, what that looks like.
We could start it off by talking to them about bone mineral density and overall lifespan and longevity for their sport by having more tissue compliance, tendon compliance, just general strength, not only just for their sport, but also for life. So just say we have a runner, right? You have them strength training, you have them doing unilateral exercise, so one side of the body. You can help potentially increase power output on the ground by having more compliance because of that strength training. Being in the gym doing that though, you don't want to take away from your sport. So let's say you are a runner, you don't want to kill yourself in the gym and then be too sore to go out and actually run or do what you need to do. So it's that balance. So like that 10,000 foot view is, what can I do to make myself stronger, but not necessarily put on more muscle. So, being in that 1 to 5, 1 to 6 rep range type of thing. Like I need to get stronger. Maybe I'll increase some of these tendons. Like I'm having some knee issues. So you go into the gym and work on some isometric type exercises, or you focus on some like hip external rotation and internal rotation. So moving out and in and things of that nature, just kind of figuring out like what can I do to make myself better at my sport. And that's where a good coach comes in and understands what you're doing and what you want to accomplish.
For me, yeah, yeah, I agree. For me, it's just kind of rounding out whatever's missing in that person, in that athlete's sort of training, right? So if an endurance runner or a field sport athlete isn't in the gym, it's like you're missing the benefits that Joe just kind of laid out. And so for the runners that I work with, it's plyos and just regular resistance training, and with almost no, for me anyway, with almost no volume progression, because I'm not trying to get them bigger or trying, we're not adding a set every week or something. It's 2 to 3 sets of something that's pretty difficult by the last few reps. And then a lot of jumping and bounding. I got one person doing depth jumps right now. So it's just rounding out whatever's missing from the program.
Yeah, and as we know, like a lot of runners, especially ones that don't know how to do a good strength program, they'll go into the gym and probably just mimic a lot of the time they're running. So they say, I'm going to do sets of 30 on whatever exercise. So that's something that I try to tell people is and teach people is, you're already doing all this volume. So again, just like you said, round out things. I do really touch on personally a lot of the longevity in sport and just in life and, discuss strength and bone mineral density and kind of how strengthening muscle mass are almost a cheat for a good life, a healthy life. And then a lot of my athletes are like ultra runners. So a lot of it is on trails. And so we also discuss just like overall, like strong legs that can handle elevation and changing terrain. For me, it's also a lot of plyos, a lot of like lower rep strength work. I find that they generally take to that pretty well. They're like, oh, that makes sense. They're already driven athletes in one area. And so most of them take to it pretty well. So when it comes to, I've also got, I don't know if you guys have worked with a lot of field sport athletes. I've got a few field sport athletes right now. That's a little more clear to people because they see, oh, a football player does strength and conditioning. But just personally, I really enjoy programming for that because it's a little bit more like nerdy of like, all right, so we're going to train this in the gym and this translates maybe this way on the field. And then, agility training, a lot of them are in their off season, about to be in the preseason. So it's kind of really fun to just work with them through that because they don't really have a lot of scheduled practices right now. So we can throw out a lot of other things. Have you guys had experience with that or have any thoughts on that?
I've haven't had usually my background, like what we said before, is more military. I've worked with hockey players, so that's that's a lot of lower body type of stuff, not a lot of upper body pushing or pressing, pulling, just doing general stuff there. Lower body just prepping for the sport itself. So a lot of external rotation, a lot of glute development and things of that nature. So not specifically with football or anything of that nature, but I did like working with more sports because there's a lot more literature out there, so you kind of know what you're gonna do more so than military where it's the unknown and a lot of it is you just don't know what to expect. And with at least with field sports and sports in general, you have it's much more narrow and you have an idea of what's gonna happen and the injuries and things of that nature. Chris,
Yeah,
you got
I haven't worked with
yeah.
any field sport athletes at all.
I was curious, Chris, you have your TSAC, the tactical strength and conditioning certification. Joe, do you have that, or is it just
I
Chris that
do.
has that in here?
I do.
So, from a certification perspective, was there anything that was a lot different in that than the CSCS certification, or was it all pretty similar as far as science, physiology, stuff like that?
It's fairly similar, but you start getting into a lot more load carried. You start getting into um, placement of the load. You can start getting into uneven terrain. What other kind of stuff? I had a lot of questions and things related to wildland firefighting on it, and that was way outside my wheelhouse. So that was interesting trying to like figure it out while I was taking the exam of what's going on here. But the being in the military and stuff like that is definitely load carriage is huge and teaching proper pack your ruck or to pack your gear. I don't know what you did with the Navy on that side of the house, but yeah, I mean it's just like people don't do that correctly, then they're gonna screw themselves up. So I guess coming from a strength and conditioning standpoint, a lot of different carries and stuff, but also being prepared for uneven movements and awkward load carriage. Because if let's just say they don't pack it right, you should be able to have a resilient body that could handle it for an X period amount of time. I guess that would be my main takeaway from that.
I had a lot of fueling questions on mine, like for long distance rucks and stuff. But yeah, same thing as Joe's. It was a lot of load based locomotion.
So the first thing, and probably the most important thing I want to talk about for tactical athletes is like leg development and overall work capacity development, because we've talked before about running and how mileage is and everything, and there's a lot of other things to consider. So for somebody training for a selection, especially in the Army, there's a lot of load carrying. And so you might spend a lot more time, say, with a ruck or in the weight room versus out running. And Chris, we've had these discussions before about, run training versus developing legs in the weight room. So could you guys kind of give an intro or overview as to how that works and what that looks like? Because most people are very like, this is strength training, this is endurance training. I'm going to do long rucks and these fast runs. So I have to take a running program and do that and then lift. But really, you can develop a lot of the stuff you need to develop in the weight room. And then running and rucking is kind of built on top of that, if that makes sense. I don't know if you guys would say that differently or add anything to that. But yeah, I'm interested to hear what you guys think about that.
Kind of like more of the concurrent training model.
Yeah, like
Yes.
somebody training for SFAS, say you want them to be really good at load, right? And have a really resilient and strong lower body, a lot of work capacity, and be able to move far, say with a ruck. So it's going to look different than somebody who's, for instance, training for a running event or something, right? But a lot of people training for selection think that they have to run 30, 40, 50, 60 miles a week because they see that they're going to be on their feet for a long time. And that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, so I guess it comes down to it all depends and the individuality of people. So let's say you have someone who's been in the weight room their entire life. They went to a D1 school, they played football, they did all these things, and they've been in the weight room. They grew up in the weight room, so they've got that aerobic. That aerobic capacity is lacking. So you're going to want them more on their feet. You're going to want to progress them more. You're going to do that concurrent training. So yeah, you're going to do maybe one ruck a week or maybe one ruck every 2 weeks or something like that, like long distance. And you're not going to have them go fast, but you're just going to have them get used to carrying a load and understanding that placement. But then you're also going to have them do some runs during the week. But a lot of times you can get that aerobic capacity built by doing other modalities like stair stepper, the bike, the elliptical, things of that nature. So they're not getting so much impact on their knees and being broken going into the school. Because the last thing you want is to have someone feeling so terrible that they get to the first day, 2 days, and then they have to drop out because of it. But then you could take the other side of the coin of someone who's been cross country running their entire lives. They swam, they did everything, but they have no strength. So you're going to want to build them up that way, but still also have them understand how load carriage is. So you're going to still have them do the same type of rucking with the same type of loads or progress into the same type of loads, just so they understand what that's. But for mileage wise, you could have someone who responds very, very well to low mileage and they don't need to go that with that. But someone on the other hand may need that high mileage just because that's just who they are. So it's playing around with it. But doing extreme amounts like you're doing 100 miles a week, 50, 60 miles a week, more than likely that is not necessary for those types of courses.
Yeah. And I think just from a progression perspective, just adding some volume in on a ruck that you do once a week is kind of, it's pretty safe. It's like you're not doing like this controlled hop that you do when you're running, right? So we get a little bit less force. I usually prescribe 20-pound easy rucks, kind of like in a zone two, like with a zone two effort, and just adding 5 to 10 minutes a week until they're very, very comfortable going 90 minutes. I've included rucks as part of interval workouts. So on a track, somebody's doing 6x400 at whatever, the recovery in between is with the ruck instead of like a jogging or standing or walking rest. And I think Joe mentioned like the cross country runner who has no experience with real strength and resistance training. That'll be way more beneficial than just keeping in all this run volume. Because I think you're limited by your limiter, obviously, right? So I remember doing a CrossFit class shortly after graduating college, and we had to do like a 200 or 400 meter med ball overhead run. I think it was 20 pounds. And a buddy of mine who had not been running a lot, he was more strength training at the time. And he was bigger than I was and stronger than I was. And I was fresh out of school from all this, cross country and track type of training. He smoked me. And it's because just wasn't used to like, oh, I can run fast. It's just 20 pounds. It makes a world of difference having something overhead or on your back or carrying something or somebody if you don't have the requisite strength to be able to move that load across it. At most selections, right? Moderately heavy things that you're moving across very, very high distances or for long duration. So if someone is an endurance athlete, that becomes a bigger part of their training. Whereas vice versa, former power sport athlete or something like that needs a little bit more aerobic work.
Yeah, I had a guy I know who was a D1 runner and put a ruck on his back, and it was horrible. He was like, something happened to his hip. I think he tore his labrum or something. And that was just load management across everything, not just the ruck. But he told me he was very surprised at how hard it was for him because he expected, I ran D1 cross country, it was like 30 pounds on the beach, right? And he was like, oh, this will be fine. I run fine on the beach normally. Wasn't fine. He'd never rucked before.
Yeah. And then you'll have the weirdos who are running with 20 to 30 pounds, like 4-mile timed runs really fast and are completely fine. I don't know what to make of that, but
They could be fine now. And then when they're like 35, 40, they're senior enlisted or senior officers or something along that nature, and they can't move. And then they go to the hospital and then they see me there, and then I'm like, hey, how's it going?
You'll get to
my
meet
body
Joe.
hurts. Yeah. So no, it's training smart in your 20s, and especially like the younger individuals that'll be listening to this is, yeah, you might be resilient now and you might be able to bounce back quickly now, but you're not going to be able to do that your entire career. And I've seen it so many times where I wish I knew now, like being 40s or something like that, right? And I could tell my 18, 20-year-old self how to train and how to do it properly, and not just push yourself to the breaking points. Yeah, these selection courses are meant to weed people out and do things of that nature, but it's not worth it to kill yourself in training and to break yourself in training. And then another thing too I see all the time is the body composition stuff is like people see Instagram, people see all TikTok, stuff like that, and they want to look a certain way. They want to be that 5% body fat. But I can guarantee you having abs and all that sort of stuff does not mean you're going to perform well. In fact, those people who are like that more than likely won't pass a selection course. And you're going to see someone who has that, 15, 16, 17% body fat pass. And it just like it blows people's minds. It's like performance doesn't equal abs and doesn't equal big muscles.
Yeah, and you
Yeah,
even
those people are probably focusing on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to, you're not they're not trained the way they should be. And then I was just going to add that training for selection is not the same as training for the demands of your job.
Right.
It's a little different afterwards. I think a lot of people who are preparing for selection or academy are really focused on trying to do really hard workouts, really trying to push themselves because that's what they're going to encounter, and then try to continue to do the same after they get through. And it just looks different. It's right. Would you agree?
I 100% agree. The job and selection are two different animals.
Yeah, I was just going to add with selection too. A lot of the times you're burning more calories than you can take in, even with being told to eat as much as possible. So going in with a low body fat, you don't have as much to lose. Whereas somebody with a higher body fat might finish selection at a lower body fat because they just couldn't replenish all the calories they burned. But that doesn't mean you should go in that way because, yeah, again, you don't have as much to lose. So it can be helpful to have some of those stores. Plus, a higher body fat percentage to a point can, if your body fat's too low, you're kind of starving yourself. Your recovery is going to be horrible. You're not going to be able to train as much if you're not eating enough. I know you probably live that with the nutrition stuff, especially in the army.
Your hormones will be out of whack and everything like that. So, it's just the aesthetics. It's what you want. Do you want to get to a certain point in your career, or do you want to look a certain way for whatever reason? So it's just as an individual, have to weigh that, and you can't always get the best of both worlds, unfortunately, unless you just got the genetics to do it. But most people don't.
Yeah, yeah. People discount the genetics portion too sometimes of just some people hold body fat differently. I hold more body fat around my waist, which is generally men, but some people hold their body fat elsewhere. So our similar body fat percentage can look completely different. So that's, just an interesting side point. But when it comes to training for selection, the people that I've worked with tend to kind of need a little bit of everything. So obviously it's going to be different for each person, but we'll generally do like speed work because there are timed runs you have to be able to hit. And then obviously the strength training from a just like load management, well-rounded, especially lower body, able to lift a good amount and build up their work capacity. And then for the rucks, we'll generally do, depending on the person, every 2 to 4 weeks, do a ruck, depending on their timeline and how good they are at rucking, and build up the weight, especially because the Army rucks are heavier than like the Navy rucks that you have to do. But generally, I don't know what your guys' take is on rucking, but I mean, we've talked about rucking before and ruck running, but my experience and other coaches that I've talked to that work a lot with tactical athletes tend to prefer to put rucking in, at the most every second week, sometimes even every third or fourth week. And a lot of people actually get a few questions. I have a lot of guys I used to work with who are now joining the Army to go to SFAS and RASP. And, they're like, hey, how much should I be rucking? I ruck twice a week or once a week or one time. Some guy said 3 times a week. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on rucking frequency, because I basically explain like you build up your aerobic capacity and you build up your work capacity and strength in the gym. And then you kind of build the skill of rucking, but rucking too much it kind of increases, a misstep with weight is a lot more risky than a misstep without weight.
I would 100% agree with that. And I think the current state of the military, and this is my opinion, not a DOD or anything like that, there's too much emphasis on going too hard, too quick, and trying to do as much as you possibly can. And I would say that, twice a week or twice a month rucking is probably better, or one time a month rucking, than trying to do it every week. Because your body, if you're doing everything, right, you're keeping your nutrition, you're keeping sleep, proper training in the gym and stuff like that, you're going to be able to recover. Most people aren't doing that. So if you're adding on long rucks with 35 pounds without water, and then you add water on top of it and you can't recover from it, you're just going to you're going to look at your Garmin, you're going to look at your Whoop, you're going to look at your Oura Ring, or you're just going to wake up feeling like trash. It's just lowest hanging fruit is best. I guess we're going at. And Chris, I don't know if you've seen it too.
Yeah. I think it's just like, uh, I, I just think it's really contextual. You might have a training week here or there where you might want to do some more rucking. Maybe you want to test somebody a little bit or something like that. The few guys I have who are rucking are doing like submaximal weights, like at most 20 pounds. And every once in a while we'll do a long time trial ruck with the prescribed weight or whatever. But maybe I might have an intensification phase where it's like, hey, you're going to ruck 3 or 4 times this week. And I mean, I think that's fine as long as you know your athlete's recoverability and like what they're able to handle. But it's not like we're doing that week in and week out all the time. I think well, you guys would agree, the more you add in of something, the less you're going to do of something else. So if there's some other limiter on the table that you need to be training, then that's not getting attention. You're kind of That's a detriment to your athlete. So
Definitely. So we've mentioned that people are going to have to transition once they get through a selection to do their job, whether it's fire, police, military, special operations, whatever job they have, it's going to look different than selection. Selections tend to generally be more aerobic based than what you need to do once you get to a job. Chris, I think you mentioned in another podcast that you want people to be work capacity monsters and you really want to focus on that anaerobic side of things. And so you're not going to do as much cardio. So when it comes to strength training for somebody on the job, we've already kind of mentioned you want to be able to be resilient because things might be weird. You could think of a firefighter carrying somebody or something out of a building, or obviously a tactical athlete carrying a ruck wrong or having to carry, basically anything. So when you build a strength program for somebody who's on the job, how does that look different than somebody who's maybe training for selection?
so I actually don't have any athletes who are active duty. This is a joke question.
Really, it's the balance of the job and what they can do. So if the only time they have to work out is during PT hours and they have to do mandatory PT, is being able to go to their commanders and be like, hey, we have X person wanting to train up for a selection course, or they want to go to a different school, or they want to do that. Is, hey, are they able to go ahead and do this training plan instead of doing what everyone else is doing? So that's the first step. And if it's yes, it's working with that individual and moving them forward, progressing that way. Sometimes you have people who still have mandatory PT, but after work, they can go ahead and work out. So it's the same type of step, being able to balance their training plus their job, recovery, all that sort of stuff. So if they have a high stress job, sometimes, you're going to have to push a little bit in the gym or you're going to have to pull back. So it all depends with that. As you're aware, military life is crazy and you could be starting at, 0600 and go all the way to 2000 depending on the day. So it's really just up in the air. You never know, but hopefully just getting them on a consistent path with something at least 4 times a week of training. And so maybe 3 times a week of full body and then trying to get some aerobic in there. So it's really it's just shot in the dark a lot of times. And that's what I really like about H2F, is because it's starting to get soldiers training into more structured training and have more progression and actually making sense instead of, hey, we're going to go, all out 5 miles Monday through Friday type of thing. Cause you would see that a lot. Or it's the complete opposite. You have someone who just loves strength training and never does any sort of aerobic conditioning. So it's just balance, I guess. That's what most of the military just needs balance, or any sort of training whatsoever. I mean, sometimes you get some of these soldiers who join and don't want to do anything and they realize they made a mistake and they try and get themselves out by going through ABCP process and things like that. So it's just difficult, I guess. That's the best way to put it.
Do you work with a lot of people that are kind of always able to go home? Maybe they work in like an office or just kind of do stuff. Or do you work with a lot of people that are going out to the field like a good amount and might, not be able to go home and sleep in their bed like all the time?
So currently where I'm stationed, it's mostly office jobs and people are able to come home at night. So that's why I'm saying earlier in the episode here was more general population because it is that 9 to 5, but still got the requirements of the military on top of it. So it's just getting people to move, and that just has a lot to do with being at a medical institution right now or installation.
Yeah, I had these kids one time that I worked with in the army. They were probably like 18, and they had PT at 3 in the morning, and they would stay up all night. And they told me one time with pride that they were consuming like over a gram of caffeine a day and sleeping like 2 hours a night because they had to get up for PT. And I was like, dude, I was so taken aback at. They were like, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead, and it was like, okay, man, again, talk to me in 10 years.
Do people still say that?
I mean, they were these 18-year-old kids in the army, so they were like
Yeah.
bulletproof as far as they were concerned.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So as far as strength training for a tactical population, we've kind of highlighted it's very generalized. Just like being mindful of the time. Is there any other like tactical topics you want to talk about as far as strength training or really training in general?
I had a quick thought, like with, I don't know how other cities do it, but Albuquerque Fire here has, their firefighters on a 48-hour shift, right? And the other 4 or 5 days they're off. And so in my head, I was just thinking, if I were working with a active duty firefighter, it would look a little bit more like um, 3 to 5 days of dedicated training when they're not on shift. And depending on what that first day back from their shift looks like for them from a recovery perspective, that could take the form of maybe like an easy aerobic day or something just a little, just low stimulus kind of work. And then the other days of training would just look more, okay, let's get back into whatever progression model or progression strategy we're using for you for all these other qualities that you're going to need for your job. So that day 2 might look like more total body strength and accessories and stuff. And then the other days we might repeat another full body day or work on energy systems development. And then as you get closer to your next shift, we wind down with a low stimulus day, something long and aerobic and maybe a little bit of cals. I think 1 or 2 episodes ago, Joe mentioned something like it's a little dependent on what an active duty athlete might do right before they go on an op or on shift. And some people really need, to kind of get some energy out. And Joe, I think you mentioned something like, oh, you'll have them do like a 10-minute cap of something really hard if that's what their jam is, But in my head, I would kind of want somebody to wind down a little bit and feel recovered before they go on to do their job for, the next 12 or 48 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah, and for those like firefighters, my in-laws are firefighters and paramedics, and it's some days you have nothing but time to train, and then some days you're on call after call after call. So for me, like I like to approach it as we're going to hit all the training that we need to hit the rest of the week, and then this is like an
Mhm.
optional session. If you want to get this in, if you have the time, do it. If it doesn't work out, don't stress over it. I find that works really
Right.
well. I have another guy who's got a super hectic schedule. He's in the military, and I've just programmed in. I call them buffer days. So it's a day with no training. That way, if you miss the session, just move it to the next day. And that seems to work
Mhm.
pretty well for him because he, week to week, is just so different. So it becomes keep the order session the same or the session order the same. But, here's some buffers to fill in if you, can't hit a session.
So,
Joe, did you have any final thoughts or any things you want to talk about?
No, I think we covered a lot of good stuff today.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I always enjoy talking to you guys. Obviously, there's always a million different things we could talk about, and we're all super busy, so time is always the limiter, as is pretty normal. So,
Mhm.
if you guys want to give real quick, I'll put it down in the show notes, and it's obviously in the show notes for the last podcast. If people are interested in coaching or anything like that, Chris, since the last podcast you've started in person, I believe. So, if you want to plug that as well too.
but yeah, I mean, people can find me at Christopher Runs on Instagram.
Then you can find me at
Website.
oh,
Yeah, sorry. Website's not up yet, but it will be soon.
nice. You can just find me at Joe Dzubak. That's on my social media the same way. So
Good deal. And if you're in Albuquerque, right? Albuquerque, yeah, hit Chris up. All right. It's good to talk to you guys.
talking
Appreciate
to
you
you
guys
as
coming
well.
on. I'll talk to you
See you
guys.
guys.
And yeah, we'll have to do this again. So have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, sister. Bye, Joe.
You guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you enjoyed it, it would be helpful if you could leave a rating or a review on whatever platform you're listening on, as that helps us reach more audiences and get more awesome guests on. If you're interested in anything we talked about today, you can check the show notes for all links. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next podcast.